Hey guys, so I know that I'm not actually there right now because I'm on sabbatical, and so you're not going to see me until June. But I wanted to give you a little bit of just kind of a supplemental on what you're going over today, which is the book of Habakkuk. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible. I absolutely love Habakkuk. There are verses in Habakkuk chapter 3 that have carried me through some of the hardest times in my life, where I've had the hardest time seeing God and trusting God and following Him and everything else. Basically, Habakkuk is a contemporary of Jeremiah in Judah, and God is laying out this thing for him about the sin of Judah and how He's going to bring in the Babylonians to completely conquer Judah. And in Habakkuk, one of the roles of the prophet, of being a prophet in the Old Testament, and honestly, I don't think that changes from Old Testament to New Testament. But one of the roles of the prophet was to stand in the gap between the covenant makers, between God and between those He has made a covenant with, and to constantly kind of bring people back to the covenant. That's what the prophets would do. That's why you have prophet after prophet after prophet who would look at Israel and look at Judah or look at a king or a group of people and say, you are doing this wrong. You are doing this wrong. Come back into what you have promised, into following God and pursuing God. Come back into the promise. Come back into the covenant. And so that's what Habakkuk would do as a prophet, and he would do that with the Israelites, the Jews that lived in Judah. But Habakkuk was actually a little bit bolder than that. He didn't just do that with the people. He actually did that with God too, because a covenant takes more than one person. It takes two. And so God also signed effectively on the dotted line with the covenant of Israel being His blessed people, His chosen people, the people that He would love and give all this land to in the promised land, and all these other things that came with being a great nation under God. God also signed on to that. And so Habakkuk, though, would look at this and say, God, you promised all these things. You promised all these things. Where are you, God? God, how are you doing this? We recognize the sin. And so Habakkuk would stand and say, your people, I recognize what you're saying, that your people have sinned against you. They have rejected the covenant. They have rejected the promise. But these are your people. These are your children, God. And yet, God, you stand there and you say that you're going to bring in a people that's even worse. You're going to decimate the righteous people with an unrighteous people. And Habakkuk would stand there and say, God, answer for yourself. Answer for yourself. And we have the same types of moral questions sometimes with God, these dilemmas where we say, God, you call yourself good, and yet look at all the bad that happens to good people, that happens to your children, to your believers, and yet you call yourself good. And atheists and people who don't believe in God will use that and try to twist it and twist faith into something that has less meaning, because we struggle with that dilemma of who God is, without ever recognizing that, first of all, God is God. God sees a bigger picture than we see at all times. And God saw a bigger picture than Habakkuk saw. He knew that, yes, this was going to happen, and it was going to happen for a purpose and for a reason. But at the end of it all, there would be great blessing. And it was not God rejecting the covenant. It was actually calling the people back into covenant by cutting off the sin, so that what would remain was this remnant of people that would come to Him. Chapter 2 of Habakkuk is great. It's actually God's response back to Habakkuk after Habakkuk challenges God. And in it, he actually flat out insults the Babylonians. If you look at Habakkuk and you go to verse 6 verse 9, for example. No, it is 6. If you start in verse 6, you get a series of woes. Of woe to you who did this, woe to you people who this. Woe to you people who plotted against my people. Woe to you people who plundered against my people. Woe to you people who waged war and acted with violence against my people, and so on. And the way he does this, if we could read the actual Aramaic, the Hebrew, obviously a lot of people do. I don't know Hebrew. But those are actually written as in the poetic form of it. It's an insult to say, you think that you are so mighty, Babylonians. You think that you are so great, and yet watch what I will do to you. Yes, you will be used. Yes, you will be used to bring justice to my righteous people, but you are also going to be held accountable for your actions. You are going to be held accountable for the way that you treat them. You're going to be held accountable for the way that you have come against them with violence and with hate and your pride and everything else. Woe to you, Babylon. Woe to you. And in that, he's telling Habakkuk that I'm not just using this unrighteous group to wage war and punish and discipline my righteous people, but I'm using what they are bringing actually in order to bring out the sin and cut the sin off of the righteous people, to leave the remnant behind that will come into closer relationship with me. And it's out of those people, actually, Habakkuk would have thought of the Messiah, but it's out of that remnant that Christ eventually comes out, and that we receive hope. And it's actually out of this captivity that the Babylonians brought that kings of other nations began to recognize the power and the might of God. They did that through Daniel. Go back to and read Daniel some more. They began to recognize, Nebuchadnezzar began to recognize the power of God. And then even more so when the Persians came in and conquered Babylon, and the Persian kings ended up honoring Israel and sending the Israelites back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and everything else. And through all of this, you end up with this remnant growing up that actually sought God, that looked to him. I love Habakkuk's response. Like I said, Habakkuk is one of those that has carried me through some pretty hard times. When I struggle with my faith, when I struggle with circumstances of life, and I don't know what to expect, I don't know what's coming. One of my personal life verses that I go to a lot is this. It's Habakkuk chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 16, but the three verses I usually rely on are the last three, 17, 18, 19. But let me read verse 16. Chapter 3, verse 16. I heard, and my inward parts trembled. At the sound my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. Habakkuk was being called to wait for this thing to come in, this group of people to come in to destroy and take over and conquer God's chosen people. He didn't want to wait. He didn't want it to happen at all. He wanted the people to come back to God. He wanted the blessing to fall onto Israel. He had to wait. And because he knew it was coming, because there was pain and there's suffering and there's hardship, he felt in his bones, he felt the decay, he felt the death, and he grieved and he mourned. And there are times in our lives, there are going to be times in your life that you're going to have to go through that. Habakkuk's response, though, in verse 17, though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls. Let me put that in modern language, okay? Though my source of strength be completely weakened, though I have no food on the table, I have no money in my pocket, though all these things, I have no way to generate wealth, I have no way to generate prosperity, though everything externally around me looks absolutely hopeless. Yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds feet, like the deer's feet on the heights, and he makes me walk on my high places. Though everything around you looks hopeless at times, it's part of life. It's part of life. And we all go through those seasons. I'm not going to tell you that you're not, especially as we pursue God, because as we pursue God, his enemies are going to come against us, and his enemies want to destroy hope. But like Habakkuk, we can stand in that gap and we can say, yet I will exult in the Lord. Plant your feet down, plant your flag down, and declare that. Yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. Not the stuff around me, not the fig tree, not the cattle's in the stall, not the fruit on the vine, not the thing that brings prosperity or popularity or reputation or anything else. That stuff is meaningless. The Lord God is my strength. Him alone. He alone is my strength and yours. He has made my feet like hinds feet and makes me walk on my high places. It's one of, for me and my life, that has been one of the most important verses, which is why I wanted to do this video for you teens, Beacon, because it's that important to me. And instead of me being gone on sabbatical and trusting somebody else to teach the class, I wanted you to hear my heart when it comes to Habakkuk. And I hope it encourages you to open up Habakkuk and to read through it and to understand what it is to stand in that gap between sin and what God calls us to. And how in that place we can reject the sin, welcome in God's righteousness, and even in the midst of hardship and despair and things changing and looking different, we can say, yet I will exalt the Lord. God is my strength. Nothing else. He's all that matters. He loves you. I love you. And I'll see you in June. Bless you.